Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Amsterdam Talk Season 4, Episode 23. And tonight I bring Miss Rita Bliven on tonight. How you doing, Miss Bliven?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, before we started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So, my name's Rita Bliven. I am promoting my book that is in editing, so it's not yet released Canyons and Fireworks, and it's all about my attachment healing journey.
Okay, your attachment healing journey.
hmm
So, what I get from your background information, you said there was international parental kidnapping.
There sure was in the early 80s. It was something that would not go down nowadays. Nowadays, it would be on the news and be a big deal. But when my dad took me to Mexico and separated me from my mother and her side of the family in the early 80s, my mom was told that he was the biological father, so he had the right to do that. And I lived
Hmm.
with him for 2 years. And then when I was 3 years old, my mom got me back and did the same thing. She separated me from my dad and his family and changed my name. And so my early childhood life had a lot of change and a lot of inconsistency, and I never got to bond with any lasting primary caregiver. So I developed an attachment issue.
Okay. So your mom changed your name, so this is not your biological name.
My birth name was Margarita, and then my
Okay.
dad's last name is Perez. So I was, pretty much as Mexican as you can get. That's like
Okay.
Jane Doe or Jane Smith in the Mexican community. I was Margarita Perez.
Okay.
But yep, but my stepdad adopted me, and my mom went ahead and shortened my name to Rita instead of Margarita. And then I got to pick my own middle name at 5 years old, and so I picked Cass. I saw a movie about a little girl named Cass, and so I picked Cass. I was Rita Cass Callan,
Okay.
um, and now I'm married, and so now my name is Bliven now.
Understandable.
Yeah.
So as you got older, did anybody explain why those two events happened?
Oh yes, it wasn't anything where I had to wait to get older. I was always aware of it because my first memories are of learning Spanish. I'm sorry,
Mm.
forgive me, learning English. So I
Okay.
lived in Mexico as a toddler. And so Spanish was my first language. And then my mom took me to her hometown in the States and nobody spoke Spanish. So I had
Right.
to learn English by submersion. And so I was always aware that something had happened and it was always explained to me. And there was nothing really hidden from me.
Okay. So nothing was hidden from you. So
Mm-mm.
well, I guess the viewers probably will want to know like what part of Mexico were you taken to?
Sure. I was taken to Hidalgo, Mexico, which is about 3 hours from Mexico City. So it's not at all by the coast. It's in the middle of Mexico and very rural area. And my dad was one of 11 kids. And so lots of aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents and great grandparents around. It was a very loving family, just as my mom's family is a very loving family. But it was the early 80s. My dad didn't think he would have any custody rights against a full blown citizen because he was just a legal resident
Right.
at the time. And so it was, a loving thing. He took me to Mexico because he wanted to be with me, but there were still some consequences that I had to deal with.
Okay. And your mom's hometown was?
In rural Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. And it gets pretty rural. My grandparents had a 100-acre farm when I was growing up, and there were no Hispanic people around in the 80s and 90s. Now they're starting to be, but I definitely stood out in a crowd. Let's put it that way.
Well, I know a little bit about rural areas of Pennsylvania because I'll be actually traveling that way in 2 weeks when I'm going to Youngstown. So I'll be going up the Pennsylvania
Youngstown.
Turnpike.
Oh my goodness, from Amsterdam to Youngstown. What are you going to do what are you doing? Why are
Well,
you going there?
I live in Baltimore.
Oh, okay.
The show was
Gotcha.
just named Amsterdam.
Gotcha, gotcha. I just assumed you were in Amsterdam. Okay, so
No,
you live
no,
in
no.
Baltimore. Okay, so that's not too much of a stretch then.
Right, but yes, I'll be going through that rural area of Pennsylvania in about 2 weeks, heading up the Pennsylvania Turnpike through Breezewood all the
Uh-huh.
way up to Youngstown.
So you know the drill. You know how it is.
Yeah, I don't really feel like driving it, but I understand it.
Yeah.
but I get it. But hey, we're here to talk about attachment theory. So,
Yes.
what is attachment theory?
So attachment theory is the idea, and it's not too controversial. Most moms and families will agree that it makes sense. But it's the idea that every little baby that's born needs to form a bond with at least one primary caregiver that's loving, responsive, and consistent. And then that bond helps the child develop and helps the child understand relationships and understand their place in the world and really allows them to become a person. And if that bond is disrupted because of neglect or abuse, it creates problems.
Right.
Most people understand that. What most people don't necessarily think of is if there's separation. We hear the stories of child abuse and neglect, and of course, we know that kids are going to grow up and have issues if they've been abused or neglected. But we don't necessarily automatically think of separation. We think, well, the kid was 2; they don't remember, and
Mhm.
that could be the furthest thing from the truth. They might not consciously remember, but it's a traumatic event for a child to be separated from their primary caregiver and the person that they had bonded with and having to reacclimate somewhere else before they're fully developed. And so that's sort of my story, is that I was separated from my mother as a baby, and a 6-month-old baby is very close to their mother.
Right.
And then I managed to reacclimate and bond with my dad and his big, loving Mexican family. And then at 3, I was taken again and didn't see my big, loving Mexican family again. And so anybody I bonded with, I was separated from pretty traumatically as far as a little child is concerned. And lots of kids in the foster care system can understand it, or a child who lost a parent.
Mhm.
Maybe there was a loving, responsive, nurturing parent, but maybe they passed away. And it can cause a child to not have a strong attachment or a healthy attachment style.
Right. So when you say when you pull those children away, well, that's sort of a question down. So I guess we say, what are the different attachment styles?
Yeah, no, I think I know where you were going with that. So it's not a conscious thing, it's a subconscious thing, but there are basically two main reactions. Subconsciously, the child says, "Oh no, there's no primary caregiver that's taking care of me, so I have to take care of myself."
Right.
And the people that have that thought process usually develop into avoidant attachment style. Then there's
Mm.
the child that says, "Oh no, this person that's my primary caregiver that's supposed to be taking care of me can't. So I've got to find other people to take care of me." And they're kind of desperate to have their needs met. People with that thought process usually develop anxious attachment. And then there's a third, which is disorganized, which is a combination of anxious and avoidant. And usually there has to be extreme chaos in the child's upbringing, like alcoholism,
Mhm.
in order for disorganized attachment to develop. It's the most rare of the three unhealthy attachment styles.
It's the most rare, but would you say would be like the percentage of that in the world of children?
Oh boy, you're going to get me on a tangent. So I don't believe the percentages at all, because
Okay.
the standard percentage is that 60% of people have a healthy attachment style and 40% don't. Of the
Right.
40% that don't have a healthy attachment style, about 45% have avoidant,
Hmm.
about 35% have anxious, and then the difference is disorganized. But that's all self reported. So there's no specialist going out and analyzing people. They're just questionnaires that go out to the general public. And most people aren't self aware enough
Hmm.
and most people don't even know what attachment is,
Right.
to really answer the questionnaires properly. New research says that 2/3 of adults living in the West have some sort of attachment issue. So it's been drastically underreported for years and years and years. And we're just now starting to get real numbers on just how much people suffer with attachment problems.
Okay. So in the West, when you speak of the West, you're talking about Western civilization as far as like the
Yes.
Americas. Okay. All right.
Yep. European and American. Yep. The
Okay.
West. Yep.
Clear it up. Some people may think it's just the west of the United States, but no, it's
Oh
not.
no, it's not a West Coast thing. It's a modern civilization thing
Right,
because we can't really compare ourselves to cultures that are so different from ours. You
right,
know, the family structure is completely different in, let's just throwing it out there, Arab countries where one man can have 10 different wives and each wife has 10 children and they're all a family unit. We can't really compare ourselves
right.
to those family units. So it's the studies are mainly done for the West.
Well, having 10 wives, that's actually illegal in this country. So,
Right.
so it's
Right.
illegal. But
But it
I,
does still happen.
yeah, but I think I read something goes on like that with the Mormons in Utah that they may have
Hmm.
like one or two or something like that. I used to supervise somebody who had three wives. One lived in
Oh
this
wow.
country, one lived very yonder. So that's a different story.
Okay.
But okay, so you said you don't believe in the numbers, but uh, how did you learn about the attachment?
So in the early 90s, my mom got me into professional counseling, which was super progressive for her in Western Pennsylvania on a teacher's salary. And I don't know that the term was ever said out loud, but it was explained to me that because I was separated from my mom and then my father, and then my mom got me again, that I had a foundation of love issue.
Right.
And then when I was older, because I stayed in counseling, the terminology was made known to me
Okay. So you learned through it through a therapist.
through counseling, professional counseling, yes.
I got you. Well, I guess you could say what caused your attachment issue because you stated that you were taken down to a rural town in Mexico back to rural Western Pennsylvania. So is that where would you believe where it started at?
I think it probably started when I was taken from my father. So nobody knows the exact science on it. Some
Hmm.
people say attachment is developed from 0 to 3 years old.
Right.
Other studies say from 6 months to 2 years old. They don't
Hmm.
know the exact science, but generally speaking, I had three major events by the time I was three that separated me or changed my primary caregivers. I would imagine that I bonded the most with my dad and his Mexican family over the 2-year period that I was in Mexico,
Right.
and that being taken from them was probably the most traumatic because my first memories were of being in a new country with a new family that didn't speak my language and that I didn't look like. So that was probably the most traumatic. It probably wasn't as traumatic as a 6-month-old going
Right.
to Mexico. It probably wasn't that traumatic. I don't know. We'll never know the exact science, but you have to take all the information into consideration and kind of kind of make sense.
So as you got older, as far as like going through high school, I guess boyfriends, I should say, was
Hmm.
there any attachment issues with them?
Oh yes, oh yes. So um, typically, someone with an avoidant attachment style is not really good at relationships because they're the ones that are afraid of commitment. They're the ones that are lone wolves and feel like they're going to lose themselves in a relationship.
Hmm.
They're the ones that say, if you text once in the morning and then the next day you text in the morning again, they're like, oh my gosh, you're suffocating me. They feel suffocated in just normal relationships. People with anxious attachment are very clingy. They're the ones that text, and when you don't text right back, they automatically think you're mad at them. So it's the two, different ends of the spectrum. I tried to have relationships, and they were all just terrible because I would feel suffocated or feel like it was too much and then act poorly. So
Hmm.
yes, attachment issues very much so show up in dating and marriage and parenting and really your relationship with yourself, believe it or not.
Okay. So as you got older, so how is it now with both sides of the family? Is everything okay?
Everything's okay now. A huge part of my healing journey was to reconnect with my father and his huge Mexican family and go to Mexico and do all the things when I was when I was older, when I was in my 20s and early 30s. And that was a huge healing thing to do for me. And that's one of the things that they recommend for people with avoidant attachment is to go
Mhm.
kind of back in their past. And not everyone can do it as literally as I did. I literally went back to Mexico. I literally reconnected with my family. Some children that are adopted or that their parents died or whatever the case may be can't go back in time, but you can reconnect with the place that you're from, the culture that you're from, the history as much as you can, and it's one of the first steps in attachment healing for an avoidant.
They always say you can always go back home.
Mhm. Yep. Yep.
So, okay, so you talked about the children. So, how can parents help their children have a healthier attachment?
The best thing is to be present with your child because the child needs you to be loving, responsive, and consistent. And, the cares of this world make us adults pretty stressed out and tired. We work an 8-hour shift, we drive home in traffic, our phone is blowing up, we have bills to pay. And it's really easy for us to love our children and provide for them and to make sure they're safe and have a roof over their head and get them to school on time, but to not really be present and not really hear the children and not really understand what the children's likes and dislikes are, and to nurture their little personalities as a person. That's one of the greatest things a parent can do to nurture attachment is to really get to know their children and to really hear their children and be responsive. Even if you're having a bad day, you may have bills to pay and your boss doesn't understand what you're going through. Well, if your kid has a scratch, it might not seem like a big deal to you, but you being responsive helps the child to realize they have a foundation of love and then they have a strong, secure attachment style.
Well, that's the thing, and I always say you better get them young because once
Yes,
they become teenagers, they don't want to talk to you at all. And it's kind of
yes,
a life cycle. It
it
reverts
is.
itself because you become a baby, a toddler, adolescent. You go through these stages. You want to talk to your parents, but then when you hit that teenage, it's like, no, I don't want to talk to them. They don't know anything. This, that, and the other. Then when you get in your 20s, it's like, okay, man, I want to talk to my parents again.
Uh-huh.
So it's a crazy life cycle how it goes. So I always say, make
It
sure you
is.
hold on to your kids while you can because once they become teenagers, it's just a normal fly by night thing,
You hit on such a good point. So before there was ever the teen years, there's the terrible twos.
right?
We all talk about it. Well, the terrible twos is actually a very healthy developmental stage. So the baby is completely dependent on their caregiver for
Mhm.
food, water, clothing, shelter, for sanitation, all of it. Well, then by the time they're two, the baby's walking, I should say the toddler's walking, sometimes talking, usually feeding themselves. And so they're starting to explore the world.
Mhm.
And the fact that a child has a terrible two phase is indication that they have a strong foundation of love
Right.
because they know I could grab these scissors, but my caregiver isn't going to really let me do anything that's harmful. I'm exploring the world and I'm testing the boundaries, but I know that they're really going to take care of me. If a child does not have that strong foundation of love, they may not go through that developmental stage in its entirety, and then they're not developing as a person. Then we kind of coast through the elementary school years. And then to your point, we go through another one of those stages in the teen years. In the
Mhm.
teen years, again, the child is developing and testing the waters and testing the boundaries and, interested in dating and interested in hanging out with friends overnight or whatever the case may be. But if they have a strong foundation of love, they know that ultimately their caregiver is not going to allow them to do anything that's truly harmful. Even though it's difficult for the parents, both of those stages are extremely important for their development and in attachment. So we have to be flexible with our parenting and maintain a healthy connection even through those changing cycles.
So that would be some of the steps you can use to improve your own attachment.
Exactly. Exactly. So I know with my stepdaughter, she was a daddy's girl and we were her best friends in the whole world. And then she turned 13. And
So
to your
how old were you when you came into the picture?
She was 9 when I came into the picture.
Okay. Okay.
And we were BFFs, and he was her BFF. She's such a daddy's girl. And then almost overnight, she didn't want anything to do with him, and she wasn't sure about me. And we, through many ups and downs, it was a rough 6 months, but we realized that we had to adjust our parenting. We went from protector to influence. Now, do
Okay.
we still protect her? Do we still have rules? Do we still have boundaries? Absolutely. But it's not the main theme. The main theme when she was 5 through 12 years old was protector, authoritarian, you know, that sort of relationship.
I
as
got it. I
she
got
as she started to develop more so as a person, because that's what's happening. They're
you. Mhm.
turning from kids, for toddlers. The terrible two is turning from baby to a toddler,
Right.
and ultimately to a kid. Well, the teens are turning from a kid to an adolescent, and so their view of the world is changing, and that includes you. And you have to adjust your parenting. Now, we didn't go to this crazy parenting style where we don't discipline, we're our kid's best friend. We didn't do that.
Right.
But we definitely had to adjust and hear her changing views more, and to talk to her, not necessarily as an adult, but not necessarily as a child anymore,
Right.
and to find ways to connect. We spent umpteen dollars on Starbucks coffee drinks because that's what she was into. Do I think it's silly to spend $7 on a coffee drink? I do. But is that what she was interested in? And is that what she needed to open up? It was. And so we invested in that relationship by doing something that wasn't necessarily something we would want to do. And then she started talking to us and opening up. And we definitely have an influence in her life in a positive way, while still being her protector, but not nearly in the same capacity as when she was a child.
Well, that's the thing, and nobody pays that attention. When you invest in something that they love to do, they'll open up and talk to you because they're not paying attention on what they're actually doing. They're just excited in the moment. So every question that you're given, they're going to answer because they feel like if they don't answer, the fun is going to stop. So if it's Starbucks, whether it's video games, whether it's
Hmm.
sporting events, as long as you're doing something they want to do, they'll talk to you.
Yep. You're absolutely right. Whereas before, as a kid, she wanted to do completely different things. She thought coffee was gross. And so it took us a while to notice and to adjust. And that's, all relationships are fluid, even our romantic relationships. And we have to be paying attention and be willing to adjust while not dishonoring our own boundaries.
Right. Yeah, everything is fluid. You gotta understand as a parent to how you approach the situation.
Hmm.
Some situations you gotta just come in softly and just talk. Some you gotta come in hard because some things is just you gotta come in like that. You gotta come in hot. But
Uh-huh.
you just gotta just look at the situation and say, how can I approach this situation? Never lead with your emotions first, because that can send a whole nother situation to turn a whole nother situation to a whole nother situation.
Exactly. And we instinctively know that with the toddlers. When a toddler is having too much candy and we take the candy and the toddler throws a temper tantrum. We've all seen them where
Hmm.
they throw their head back in the air. I always say the arched back, when toddlers arch their back and fall down on the floor. How terrible would it be if we mimicked their behavior? That wouldn't be good parenting at all. But yet it's harder when they're teens. When they're teens and they give an attitude, or they answer with the one word answer response,
Hmm.
and it's easy to mirror that attitude back. But that's
Right.
just like throwing a temper tantrum with your 2-year-old. You can't do that. You have to be the steady person that's in control, that's aware and alert and sober as to what's really going on in the situation. And that's hard when we're working on our careers and cleaning our houses and paying bills and dealing with car maintenance or whatever is going on in our lives. It takes a lot more energy, to be present in that way.
Correct. Correct. So, how can you understand like your attachment style and your partner's attachment style and improve your relationship?
That's a great question. So, even in the healthy range, we typically tilt avoidant or anxious, and it can still be in the healthy way. If you get a little irritated when you text somebody and they don't text you right back, that doesn't necessarily mean you have an unhealthy anxious attachment style. It could mean you have a healthy attachment style that tilts anxious. So, you have to really do some self reflection. And I would also ask people that are safe. You don't want to ask that person that's always critical of you. If you have a critical parent or a critical friend, you don't want to say, "Do I do this, this, and this?" They might be critical. But those loving people that you feel that really know you and are really honest, you can ask, do I come off more as a lone wolf or do I come off more as clingy? And you'll find out pretty quickly. And probably if you think about it, you'll find out pretty quickly if you tilt more anxious or avoidant. And then you need to determine, okay, is it in the healthy range or is it in the unhealthy range? And basically, you can just look at your life. Are you happy with your life right now? Are you happy with your significant other, the relationship you have with your significant other? Are you happy with the relationship you have with your kids? Are you happy with the relationship that you have with your parents? And the list can go on and on. And pretty much people can answer pretty quickly. And it's so funny because so many times when I do these interviews, the podcaster will say, "Oh my gosh, I now understand why this so and so acts this way," or "My mom is totally avoidant," or when you start to learn about it, it's usually pretty clear. Which I mean, let me ask you: do you know which one you fall under? If while you're thinking of this, do you think you're more avoidant or more anxious?
I can be both.
You can be
I
both.
can be both because I feel like if we're talking through a text message realm, I feel like if we're going through, we having the exchanges going back and forth quickly, and then the moment you kind of like stop, it becomes like the hell is going on now? Like what's up?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't, and I'm not the person that's going to double text back, so it could be like, okay, if I ask you something at 7:30 and you don't respond to 11, 12 o'clock, it's just going to be like, okay, what took you 5 hours to do this? Because I always feel like you everybody always had a phone in their hand. You could just shoot a text like, listen, I got something to do real quick, but hold that thought, whatever.
See, I don't think that would count. So the person that automatically thinks, "Oh my goodness, they're mad at me if they don't receive a text back," it's when it's not normal. So most people would say, if you're going back and forth and then all of a sudden the person stops, everybody's going to say, "Well, what the heck happened?"
Right.
It's that person that texts you while you're at work and you don't respond right back and they say, "Oh my gosh, they must be mad at me. Oh my gosh, they must be talking to somebody else." Well, no, they're at work and you weren't even talking. That's the difference. Do you see the difference?
I
If
see it.
if everyone else would kind of be a little irritated too, then that
Mhm.
doesn't count. It's, you know, when it's sort of a little bit unreasonable. Everyone at some point has felt suffocated in a relationship.
Right.
But is it unreasonable? An avoidant is going to get a text, "Good morning," and they're going to say, "Oh my gosh, this person is suffocating me." Well, if you're talking to somebody, it's kind of reasonable to say good morning. Just like the person that's anxious is going to text and say, "Oh my gosh, they didn't text me right back," when
Right.
they're at work and they might be in the emergency room or whatever, as an ER nurse. Well, that's kind of unreasonable.
Mhm.
So we all do both. We all sometimes are clingy and sometimes are avoidant, but which one is more of a reoccurring theme, and which one is more like, well, I don't know that other people would think that that's reasonable. Does that sort of help a little bit
It
determine?
makes sense. It makes sense. It makes sense.
So I will say in Western civilization, it's usually men that are more avoidant and women that are more anxious. The culture kind of makes it socially acceptable for men to be avoidant. We see in pop culture, it's usually the man that doesn't want to commit, that's afraid of marriage. We usually see the woman that's, been planning her marriage, her wedding, I should say, since she was 12 years old and just can't wait to walk down the aisle and has her kids' names picked out. Does that kind of paint the picture a little bit?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Paints
So
the
for
picture.
so for me, with that in mind, do you think you tilt more avoidant or anxious?
Uh,
I'm calling you out.
no, you can call me. I'm really tell you depending on what day it is, because some days it's just like I don't feel like being bothered. So
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
like, so I would probably lean more avoidance because it may be like tomorrow, just like I don't feel like being bothered. Why you text me? Why you calling me?
Yeah.
So,
So it just from that, it sounds like you're probably avoidant, but in the healthy range. Because it's not like, oh, this person's suffocating me, or oh, I'm going to lose myself in this relationship, or oh, this is too much for me. It's just, hey, I'm a normal person, and some days I just don't feel like interacting. It's a down day for me. That's reasonable. That's so you probably tilt avoidant, but in the healthy range. When it's outside of the healthy range, you start to see, you know, either never been married at 50 but wants to be. Now there's definitely some people that just don't want to get married, and that's fine. But that person who's a serial monogamist who wants to be married but it just never works out, and they're 50 and they just don't know what's going on, they might have an unhealthy attachment style. Or the person that is super successful and has a lot going for them, but they compromise and they're with people that aren't worthy of them because they're
right.
so afraid of being alone that they would rather compromise and be with, a jerk, or, somebody that's not worthy of them so that they're not alone. Well, then you might be a little bit anxious attachment style because you're so afraid of being alone that you compromise yourself. So those are kind of indicators of if it's unhealthy.
Nah, I'm cool with being alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm cool with that.
Yeah. And so there's other things, there's extroverts and introverts. You can be an introvert
I'm
and
both of those.
yeah, and be a little bit more of an introvert and not necessarily be an attachment issue. It's, are you happy with your relationships? Are you
Yes.
happy where you are with life? And I'm not saying it has to be perfect. We're all,
Nothing's perfect.
yeah, nothing's perfect and we're all working on ourselves. But generally speaking, do you feel like I've got some good relationships, people get me. I don't feel like I'm constantly banging my head against a wall when it comes to relationships.
No.
If you constantly feel like you're banging your head against the wall when it comes to relationships, you might want to check out your attachment style. And you also want to be aware of the attachment styles of the people that are most important to you, the people that are closest to you. That could be your kids, that could be your spouse, that could be a best friend, that could be a business partner. It would do you a lot of good to know what their style is, because then you can avoid some of the unnecessary conflict. If you're perfectly capable of just answering all your texts from all day at the end of the day, but that your spouse really feels better if you can respond sooner rather than later. Well, maybe you can decide to respond sooner rather than later and to check your phone a little bit more frequently than you naturally would. It's not about one person being avoidant and one person being anxious and then deciding, are we going to be anxious or are we going to be avoidant? It's about meeting more in the middle.
Correct.
And the anxious person giving the avoidant a little bit more space, and the avoidant person being a little bit more responsive for the anxious. And it's compromise. All relationship is compromise. But if you have a teenager and you're trying to get closer to your teenager, then you just have to totally go their way. You don't get to, the teenager isn't going to come in the middle or come your way. No, you got to completely go to your teenager's way, and just know that it will change as they get older. They'll give a little bit more as they get older, hopefully.
Well, thank you for coming, Miss Rita, because we reached out. Actually, we ran over, but
Oh, I'm sorry, but yeah,
no, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine. You're fine. If anyone wanted to reach you, where could they reach you at?
the easiest way is canyonsandfireworks.com. It has all of my social media handles and ways to get in touch with me there.
Canyonsandworks.com.
Yep, canyonsandfireworks.com.
And also, she is on Spotify. What's the name on Spotify?
So it is, and there's a link on my website for the Spotify. I think it's Rita Bliven podcast guesting, I think is what it is. But the link's right there on my
Okay. And we also got
website.
on YouTube with the / Rita Bliven.
YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Thread, Twitter, all of it, man.
I understand.
It's a job.
Thank you for coming and teaching us about attachment theory. File viewers out there, we'll be back again for episode 24. And I totally forgot what it was because I didn't write it down. So I'm known for doing this. I think it might be grievance, or I might have did that last show. I can't remember because we did so many when you were season 4, episode 23. When you're almost at when you're at almost 100 shows, it everything starts getting looped in together. So I don't know if I'm coming or going anymore. Just waiting to finish this season 4, so we can start season 5 in January. So
There you go.
thank you.
Boom.
Thank you again. So we'll see you on our. This was a special tonight. We'll see you on our regular time, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Amsterdam Talk tomorrow. I can't remember the guests, so just tune in tomorrow, 7 p.m. Thank you again, Ms. Rita, for coming on. Thank you.
Thank you so
You're always
much.
welcome.